Hey everyone, Matt here from LimaCharlie. Welcome to another session in our LC101 series. The goal of this session, or I should say the goal of these series or of this particular video, is to give you some introductions to different parts of the LimaCharlie platform. This is the third segment in our LC101 series. The first one, we spent some time getting familiar with the concept of organizations, of multi-tenancy inside of LimaCharlie, as well as ways to customize sensor installation, look at installs, and start to get telemetry flowing into your instance. The second one, we looked at detection and response rules. We spent a lot of time going over what detection and response rules are, how they should function, what they mean. And I definitely recommend you check out our previous two videos before jumping into this one, because I'm going to make some assumptions as we walk through the data sets today, as we talk about things, make some assumptions that you kind of have an idea what we're talking about, that you've maybe seen the first two series, or you've got some familiarity with those particular parts of LimaCharlie. That being said, looking forward to this one. Thank you for everyone for joining us here today. I think we're going to have a really fun session because we're going to talk about extending the LimaCharlie platform. This is where we have a little bit of a realization at the LimaCharlie team here that sometimes you want to be able to do more with your platform, more with your endpoint, more with your LimaCharlie account. And this isn't to say that LimaCharlie isn't enough necessarily, but it's a different way of thinking about, I've already got endpoints deployed out there. I've already got visibility into my environment. What other types of things can I do with that type of reach? So that's one side of what we're going to be talking about today. The other side is going to be on our outputs. Our outputs are a very nice customizable feature of LimaCharlie. You have the ability to take data that is pushed into LimaCharlie or generated by LimaCharlie. We'll talk about both of those, and actually push that data out to another resource if you need to. The reason I'm bringing these two concepts together in this one video is they actually do intertwine a little bit. There are some outputs that are also platform add-ons, or things that you might subscribe to, or things that you might set up. There's also a very real capability of, I might want to use some additional services or feature sets or functionalities to pull some additional data into LimaCharlie, and I'm going to use that to then create different actions and so on and so forth. So really, there's a lot of customization options. There's a lot of ways you can kind of make this platform your platform. And we want to walk through the extending or extension part of that today. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and get started. I am logged into our LimaCharlie demo instance, which hopefully everyone's used to seeing by now. Let me move my camera down here and out of the way, so you'll be able to see me as I'm kind of talking. Let's go ahead and, apologies, I think there's just a technical glitch or something. With that said, let's go ahead and walk through a couple of different things about this. So first and foremost, remember today we're focused on extending the platform, on doing more with it. I want to talk very briefly about kind of the theory behind that. I mentioned it in our introduction, but this aligns with the concept of, I've already got an endpoint deployed, or an endpoint agent deployed out there. Obviously, the LimaCharlie sensor is going to be the agent that we're going to use in this case. But the thought process behind this is, I've already got visibility. So when you talk to me about things like security control testing, or perhaps collecting additional evidence, or performing digital forensic or incident response actions as needed, really anything that might require visibility in the environment, we at LimaCharlie like to think, well, you've already got a sensor that's out there. You've already got a sensor that's deployed. Why not just use that sensor? Why not just use what you've already got? And that is one of the kind of leading tenets of, not tenets, but one of the leading thoughts about why our add-ons are such an important part of LimaCharlie. So once you're in your organization, notice I've got a bunch of different things kind of floating in here. I'm not really too worried about the individual sensors in this case. We've covered those in previous videos. But I will just note for everyone, I've got a myriad of data sources inside of here. I've got Windows, Linux, Azure, AWS, GCP, Slack, GitHub, 1Password, all kinds of stuff flowing in here, some random webhooks. I've also got a few different cloud adapters set up. So long story short, I've got a bunch of different data sets all flowing into one organization here, which is great. It's exactly where I want to be, because I like being able to have all my data in one place. However, as I mentioned, Sometimes we don't want to keep all of our data in one place. Now, that's not to say I don't want to ingest it. That's just to simply say I may not want to keep it in one place. And the first thing we'll look at today is going to be our outputs. So the output side of LimaCharlie is your ability to configure, control, and really dictate what happens to your data once it's in the platform. Now, there's a couple of different options here. First and foremost, you might not want to push any data outside of LimaCharlie. You might want to keep it here. Nothing wrong with that. You can keep it here, perform operations using the web app. You could utilize the command line if you wanted to. We've actually did another video a couple weeks ago about utilizing the LimaCharlie command line. You could certainly go that route. You could also just simply say, hey, I'm happy with the web app. I like giving my analysts this login. I like having my analysts looking through the web app. I'm going to keep them in this stage. That's totally fine too. But in some cases, we might want to extend, hence our session today, extend the platform a little bit, perhaps maybe for even notification purposes. So the first one that I'll mention or talk about here is going to be adding a output to LimaCharlie. But what type of data do we want to push out of the platform? This is the first thing to decide. So this is going to kind of be your first guiding point for what you're trying to do with this data set. And let's talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail. The first one, and perhaps the most verbose, is going to be events. These are just the stream of events that are directly emitted from sensors. This is you simply saying, I want to pass all that data through LimaCharlie and send it off to somewhere else. I'll be very honest and say this is going to be the most verbose option that there is. Very, very verbose. It's the bulk of events coming from sensors. This isn't really a strategy you'd want to employ unless you're using LimaCharlie for data retention purposes. Don't forget our sensors do include a year of retention at that endpoint cost. So I could certainly see that maybe being an option, but I think our platform is powerful enough that you could certainly do things inside of there if you needed to. Hopping back and forth between tabs here, it looks like it might cause a glitch. So if it does, I apologize. I'll be right back with, as I hop over between these. With that said, so as I'm looking at this here, there's a couple of ways to whittle down that particular content. The first might be our detection stream. Now, these are different types of streams, different data types that I'm going to be pushing out. Detections is a lot more honed and a lot more granular than what you're going to find in the event stream. These are actual detections being fired by the detection and response engine, which we talked about in a previous session. Deployments is going to be something associated with deploying sensors. This is a really good alert source for agents or sensors checking in, for any sort of sensor activity. This is a really good way to stay on top of just how things are being deployed out there. Admittedly, as you're first deploying to an environment, the deployment stream will probably be very, very busy. But as time goes on, I would expect this stream to really, really wane down, kind of that long tail effect where I might have a couple here or there, but the bulk of these events should occur all at one time. There's also audit logs, which are logs for activity within LimaCharlie itself. This is a great way for you to stay on top of things that are happening in the platform against the platform. So user activity, things that users are doing inside of the environment, such as changing permissions around, accessing resources and whatnot. It's a great way to stay on top of, and I hate to say the word monitor, but that's what logs are for. Monitor what's happening inside of the platform. We admittedly do have some customers with very, very large number of employees accessing organizations at the same time. So it's good to have kind of that audit control in check so that they can identify who did what at a certain time. No one's doing anything wrong, of course. It's just keeping an eye on how we're using our organizations, how we're using our instances. The second to last one is going to be artifacts. Artifacts is a unique part of LimaCharlie. This allows you to pull kind of non-streamable or files you do not want to stream off of systems. If you think of system telemetry as a streamable event, meaning it's just kind of happening all the time, artifacts are files that I might pull at a consistent basis, like once a day, once an hour, once a week, or whatever the turnover might be. And that would be something that I would then configure the agent to pull up, configure the sensor to pull up. And I do have a output stream for artifacts in particular. And then last but not least are going to be tailored. This is the most I should say the quietest, if you will, the quietest stream. These are ones that are going to be selected in the output action of your detection and response rules. This is where you have the most control, but this is also where two different parts of our environment work together. So I can use a tailored output stream to send data out based on things that I've configured in the detection and response rules, but I need to configure them in the detection and response rules as well. The big difference there is detections is just going to be all detections that come out. Tailored is going to be a little bit more unique. So it's going to, and what I mean by that is it's going to give me a smaller subset, and I have the ability to actually control what gets sent to tailored and what doesn't. And therefore, I could say, and tailored, I think, is one of the really easy ways to kind of customize alerting, if you will. So I could build a tailored stream for P0, P1, P2 alerts, for example, or P1, P012 detections. And what I can do is then pipe those off to a separate stream. It might be some sort of ticketing system, maybe a Slack webhook, maybe an email or something. And I can simply say, all right, I'm going to use this output stream to determine high level detections, things we need to go investigate now. And for things that are lower priority or lower impact or lower risk, I might push those off to kind of a typical ticketing queue or a typical alert queue where it's not the biggest concern for us to get to. That's what our output stream is designed to do. It's designed to allow you to make evaluations and implementations like that. What do I care about? What do I want to export to a certain place? What am I most interested in? And where do I want to push that data to? You might notice in the stream or the different outputs that we've got set up here, we've kind of got these things pushing all over the place. Some of these are to test them out. Others are to just get some familiarity with, not for us, but to get some familiarity with folks upon what those different types of outputs might look like. We've also got, and you'll notice in here as well, we've also got a tie-in with some third-party applications. So for example, we do have integrations with logs.io as well as Tines. Both really solid resources I recommend folks look at. But you'll notice in that case, we're going to just use like a webhook out. And I'll talk about what the output options look like in just a moment. So just to kind of recap, there's a few or a handful of different types of streams that you would want to push out of LimaCharlie, going from verbose all the way down to least verbose. And don't forget that there's also two internalized or platform-specific log streams, deployments and audit logs. Those are going to be useful for tracking, once again, sensor deployment, user activity, and things like that. For the purpose of just kind of what we're going to walk through today, I'm going to select detections. I'm going to select the detections, and let me go back, and it's really easy to configure and build these outputs inside of the web app. And that's where I recommend folks get started in learning how to build them out. I'm going to start with the detections stream. It's perhaps granular enough that I know I could get away with sipping some of that data somewhere. However, it's not going to be super crazy and blow up any of my different resources and things like that. From here, you've got a bunch of different options when it comes to what we export out or where we export out to. I will note there is documentation on almost all of these written up and brought together that you can use, but I would say at the onset, you likely have an idea of where you want to send this data to. When a lot of folks go and configure outputs, they're not just kind of sending them things anywhere. They are instead working on, all right, I'm building an integration, or I'm working on a particular workflow or a playbook action or something, and they're pushing data to a specific source. Hopefully, whatever it is you're looking for, we've got covered inside of here. I will make a note. We've got all the major cloud providers covered. We've got integrations. This came up pretty recently too with Datadog. There's an Elastic specific one. You can actually push alerts or push data streams to SCP or SFTP if you wanted to. Slack is another big integration because it allows you to obviously push those detections to a Slack channel where my SOC could be monitoring those and looking for things as they come up. We've got some third-party tie-ins, which I talked about earlier, like Tines or Torque. I will note, and this is something important for folks to understand, in a lot of what we do at LimaCharlie, we tend to maybe take what would be a typical time of action and then wrap a particular support around it. What I mean by that is Tines, for example, for all intents and purposes, is likely going to be a webhook output. But I've made it a little bit easier. So instead of pushing you to the webhook output, we've shorthanded some of that and then pushed you right to a Tines plugin or a Torque plugin. We do give you the ability, if you want, I'll talk about this in just a moment here. We do give you the ability for some additional customization if you want to on the output. But the thing that I really like seeing about this is I can really expand the different places that I might push this data towards. If I'm integrating with another tool set further on down the analysis line, I can also push this to a centralized repository that tool set can pick from as well. Finally, last but not least, I view SMTP, SFTP, and SCP as kind of like the old legacy protocols. They've been around for quite a while, but also we don't see a lot of folks necessarily push data to SFTP these days or SCP. However, I do want to point out for a lot of different people, depending on the implementation that you're looking for, or depending on the actions that you need your team to take when particular detections are fired, you might be surprised just how effective an SMTP output might be. And then we've also, of course, got kind of your standard basics, something like a syslog output, where you can go and configure this into a really simple syslog output and then pipe that to something that's listening on syslog. Quick note about anyone setting up these outputs. I believe anything that stays within Google Cloud is significantly cheaper, aka almost free, if not free. Anything inside of Google Cloud is relatively inexpensive. However, above that, there is obviously a fee for exporting data out. I think it's somewhere in the tunes of pennies per gigs or something like that, but there is a fee for that. Definitely recommend checking out our pricing doc if you're going to be pushing a lot of data through output and you want to know what that looks like. For the purposes of this, and I'm not going to go through configuring one completely, but I want to walk through a couple so we can kind of see what types of details that we're looking for. Again, extensive documentation on this, and there's some really good examples inside of the documentation as well. And what that does is it gives you a chance to, maybe get an idea of what you might want to do with some of this data here. We've got some common patterns set up, some things that we've seen customers do before. We talk about maybe how to configure with a different application like Splunk, for example. Sending data from LimaCharlie into Splunk is a way to cut down on Splunk costs and Splunk retention, but it still lets you get that data into a workflow that your SOC or your analysis team might already have in place. There's even integrations with really good tools like Security Onion or something, which again is more of a network detection and response platform, but will accept endpoint telemetry inside of its Elastic instance and a really good place to push data. The one stream I want to talk about, because we won't go into configuring this much in our LC101 series, but I do want to make sure it gets mentioned. I talked about the tailored output stream. The tailored output stream is one that is dictated by things created in the detection and response rules. And again, this is a very, very slow, or not low, but usually a less verbose output stream, meaning we're not pushing all of our alerts in here. It is in our detection and response rules where we declare an output action followed by a name of the output. This is what will show up in our tailored stream. And this is what makes it a little bit easier to customize and say, okay, I'm going to wrap different titles around these. I might throw priorities in the title or something. And I'm going to use this to also gauge severity. And I'll talk about kind of weighing those together in just a moment. Hopping back over to the LimaCharlie platform, one couple things I wanted to bring up. First one is going to be our SMTP output. This is actually something I'm working with a customer on at the moment, only because there are a couple of different features or a couple of different fields that we do require in here. I want to make one note about all this. Any cyber sort of output protocol or anything that we integrate in LimaCharlie is done so in as much of a safe manner as we possibly can. What I mean by that is we're not going to configure SMTP and then just blast this thing off into the internet because we know it's very sensitive data. So we are going to encourage things like email encryption, authentication where possible. We will give you the ability to customize some SMTP features and things, but you are going to need to come to the table with certain types of keys if necessary, API keys, access permissions, so on and so forth. If I hop over and take a look at S3, for example, S3 bucket configuration is pretty straightforward. I will need that key ID, secret key. If I hop over to the Azure Event Hub, it's the exact same thing. Long story short, I like to tell folks this is not a kind of send it off into the ether and you never hear from it again. Usually output streams are highly customizable for very specific needs. So make sure you get your access permissions and everything set up ahead of time in order to receive that data. Last but not least, if all else fails and you cannot find the output that you're looking for or the destination that you're looking for, you could obviously do something simple like a webhook, which will allow you to send that data almost anywhere when you need to. Note there is a webhook and a webhook bulk as well. Between the two, it should be fairly straightforward. Bulk's going to be more of it's going to be a larger quantity, but it does give you a few different options in case you wanted to set these up. I would say if you're looking to configure an output, I highly recommend get in here and start to play around with the buttons. You'd be surprised at just how many different types of outputs there are and ways to configure this. And let me drill into the one menu that's kind of hanging around a lot of different feature sets here. So whether it's something like Datadog, whether it's something like Apache Kafka, whether it's Humio, Tine, Syslog, whatever it is, you might notice in all of our different outputs here, this advanced options is still in here. And I want to call out a little bit about what's in here because this can help you through testing or help you limit the number of events being sent to that output source. So your advanced options are ways for you to filter down the different types of data that gets sent out. Remember, at that high level, we've got those different types of output streams. I'm going to want to maybe customize that data a little bit more. I might say, you know what, Matt, I'm getting 1,000 detections per day. However, there's a bunch of false positive stuff in here. I don't want to necessarily remove it from LimaCharlie, but I want to remove it from my output stream. This is the place where you would go to do that. And it's a couple of different customizations. Again, there's things like transform templates, which allow you to modify the data if you need to. Setting a sample rate will give you a much easier control of data being sent out. Once again, it allows you to send a sampling so you can test ingestion on the other side. We can apply tags. This is one of the most important options because I might say, you know what, I'm going to create workflows based on outputs for all Windows workstations. And in this case, I'm going to apply my Windows and my workstations tags, which let me denote and say this output stream is only for specific tags. We can focus on detection categories, perhaps one that might be a little too granular. But again, if you're in kind of like an incident response capacity or something, you might only be interested in alerts that come from a handful of systems. You can do some selection here. You've got the ability, once again, if you're using something like syslog, you've got the ability for arbitrary field for sending data via headers. So it allows you to customize it that way. You can specify or disallow different event types. So again, depending on the types of telemetry that you're sending, let's just say hypothetically, I want to send all detections to syslog except DNS requests. I might come in here and I might say, you know what, let's go ahead and exclude DNS requests from any events that get sent out. And what that does is it just chops down the amount of data being sent around. It also gives you the ability to split things out if you want at the LimaCharlie side. And this is a strategy that I'd recommend folks think about. You might be, let's again stick with that easy number. Let's say you're shipping 1,000 detections a day from LimaCharlie out to another platform. And in that other platform, you're doing all sorts of slicing and dicing of that data. Well, one workflow I'd encourage you to consider would be, can I slice that data down at the output level? So could I perhaps say, well, if 90% of my data is DNS requests and the other 10% is stuff that I want to sort through, don't make your analyst dig through all that DNS data. Perhaps take that output stream and split it into two. I might say, give me all my detections minus DNS requests to this hook or this syslog in this case. And then on the flip side of that is I might send all my DNS requests and only my DNS requests off to another hook and then just have those things fall into the right buckets appropriately. Remember, you've still got crazy amounts of retention here within LimaCharlie. So if worse comes to worse, we'll just come and find those events again. But it's more about, cutting down outputs, whittling down data in ways that works for you, works for your analysts, and works for your workflows as well. I really don't want you to think about LimaCharlie. I just need to export all this data to another source so I can start to play around with it. I would say start to customize that here. Last but certainly not least, there's also different types of detection categories you can specify. And then there's a few different checkboxes in here, things that are going to be unique to every single output. So if I come back here to destination and we go to our Azure Event Hub, for example, you might notice that our results are not our results, excuse me, but our checkboxes are a little bit different. But in a lot of cases, they're going to be yes or no answers about whether you want to include things like the event routing that came in. Would you like to use it strings instead of the JSON object, which means we wrap strings around it, wrap it with an event type, delete on failure, flatten your JSON, so on and so forth. And again, it's just ways for you to kind of customize the way that data is being sent out. And you'll notice that you'll see some differences for every single type of output or every single destination, depending on what you're configuring. So there's some really cool stuff here. For example, if I've got a Google Cloud Storage or a GCS output, notice that I do need to select things like the directory that I'm pushing to, but I do have the ability in here to like index for search and then also gzip the files if I want. So we do offer some optimizations at the LimaCharlie side as well. So it's just going to be about knowing your knowing your outputs, knowing the destinations of where you're sending things, and then also just customizing the types of data that you're sending out. I'm going to pause and stop there on setting up, only because I don't have a destination right now with any API keys that isn't already set up. So I don't want to have to remove that because I do have some events being streamed out. But perhaps the easiest one to look at or think about is going to be something like our SFTP, because all we're doing in this case is, once again, just SFTPing data that comes out. We can do such things. Let's call this my SFTP output. My username in this case is going to be LimaCharlie. I'll send it out to a destination host of sftp.mysamplemssp.com. And we're going to send that to port 21. Maybe let's do port 5000 just because I'm feeling generous today. I don't know why generous gives you a higher port number, but it does. I might want to send out all Windows workstations data. I might want to select all my sensors, assuming, again, the tagging is going to be the one that filters down the sensor. I'm going to send this to Windows detections. So that's going to be the folder on my SFTP that I'm going to send this to. I could include a password. So we'll use Hunter2 as a password in this case. Hopefully you get the joke. Seconds per file. Again, let's just keep it at 3600. If I have a secret key, I'm going to want to send all of my, if I look through these, I'll just include them all. Not necessarily necessary. I don't want to filter anything down. I want to send all my detections out. I'm only going to filter on the platform that comes through. However, I do want to whittle the noise down a little bit. So I'm going to not include, while receipt won't be in there, I'm going to remove any cloud notification events. They likely won't be showing up in detections, but it's a way to cut down noise. Perhaps I'll just leave that out because they're likely not going to show up anyways. I'm going to bring my data down. I'm not going to include the routing. I just want the detection details. Let's see. Do not prefix with a directory shard. Nope. I'm going to index for search and then gzip my files. And that's it. We hit save output, and what happens in the background is the platform begins to start to churn that output and throw data against it. And at the end of the day, you're going to end up with a series of outputs kind of like this. We've got outputs being sent to a bunch of different locations, and I'm going to be able to go to that particular destination and look at that data and start to use that to my advantage. So outputs in a nutshell, once again, they allow you to move data out of LimaCharlie to an additional destination based on any need that you might have. I would highly recommend that you get familiar with outputs and start to play around with them. There's nothing wrong whatsoever with getting data into LimaCharlie and then exporting it to another source. We've got a ton of different customers and users who actually will export our data out to like an Elastic instance or something, but they're only exporting 10%, 5% of their data out, and they're using that as their hot storage or as their analyst console or something along those lines. And it allows them to have a much more focused Elastic console, and then let LimaCharlie be your retention and your major data collector, if you will. Last but not least, I said it before and I'll say it again. If any of these streams are relevant for what you're looking for, but you find that our output options are limited or there's something else you'd like to see, by all means, give us a holler in the community Slack, slack.limacharlie.io. Let us know if there's another stream you'd like to see on here. Datadog is one that just got recently added in, and that was because we had someone requesting it. So we went and we built the ability to export out, and boom, here we go. So I highly recommend, having to look through this. And if there's something that you see that we're missing, let us know. Sometimes there are some silly recommendations or silly questions that come in. And things, what people are looking for are very, very niche outputs. I would go a different route and I would say you can largely get to where you want to get with something like a webhook or a syslog out or something else. Worst comes to absolute worst, push it to an S3 bucket. But if you've got an edge case that you can see value in pushing data out of, let us know and we'll happily see if there's a way for us to meet in the middle on that one. But again, it comes down to what types of things you might be looking for and how you want to output those out. By the way, when I said silly requests earlier, we had someone a few months ago who was asking if we could prop up our own SMTP server for them and send things out. And that's not what we're trying to do in the platform. This is one of those, you've got to have an infrastructure to be able to receive these events and then help distribute them subsequently out to where you need them to go. Let's change the topic a little bit, and we're going to talk about extending the platform. But first, we talked about output and pushing data out. Next thing we're going to get into is going to be extending the platform a little bit further. And I'm going to take a sip of coffee while we're doing that. When I say extending the platform, what I mean from a LimaCharlie perspective is, as I said in the beginning of today's session, I'm aware that endpoint visibility, meaning having a sensor installed on an endpoint, is a huge benefit for security teams. Because A, it means I get to collect telemetry, I get detection and response capabilities. But the other nice thing about having that is it means I've got a presence out there, meaning I can also say, what else do I want to do with this installed agent, this installed sensor, this visibility that's out there? And that's where our add-on marketplace comes in. So I'm going to break this down a little bit. I will say our add-on marketplace kind of varies between what it is that you'd like to do. We have everything from API integrations to lookups to rule sets to all sorts of things that you can use to enrich your data or enrich your detections. APIs are a really good example of that. We've got a few here. I know there's more in the works actually that we're going to be announcing very soon. There is VirusTotal, for example. VirusTotal for me is the greatest or the easiest example. I find a hash for an executable or for a file gets pushed up to VirusTotal. If VirusTotal says it's bad, then go and do a particular thing. That's it. Really, really straightforward. That's an enrichment as well as both a potential detection as well. Geolocation, on the other hand, is likely going to be more of an enrichment for a lot of folks. This is where we're using an IP address to perhaps perform a lookup and add that country information to it. Again, this could end up being a detection rule for us. If there's a country that should never be connecting to you, for example, and you want to write a detection rule for it, you certainly can. However, again, some of this is just meant to be thought of kind of as data retention, if you will. The lookups and rule sets, or sorry, not retention, enrichment. Lookups and rule sets are very similar for that as well. Rule sets we talked about in our last session for detection and response rules. These are really fast and easy way for me to turn detections on inside of an environment without having to write any. Sigma is the one that we usually talk about the most. Lookups are sets of values or sets of data points that you could obviously, hence the name, perform a lookup against. And what this does is allows you to create kind of a standardized list of things or a known list of atomic values that you want to keep in place. So, for example, there's a whole bunch of them that are in here. I'll just pick up on one, for example, and let's just call it the JumpSec's RDP brute. This is a lookup of IP addresses that have been targeting RDP servers in the last 30 days. This is provided to us from our folks over at JumpSec. It is updated hourly. The nice thing about this is if you've got an externally facing Windows system, you've got a really easy way to say, is this thing bad, the thing that they're looking for? And take a look. They even provide a really simple detection and response rule that lets you go against 4624 event IDs, which is your security event ID, the one that looks for authentications. It's going to perform a lookup against the RDP brute, and it's also going to look for a logon type 10. And notice all of these, and here we go. We're flexing on the detection and response rule logic now. I need all of these values to be true in order to throw that particular detection. And what this does is it's going to be a really nice and easy way to say, hey, Matt, I'm bringing all this telemetry into LimaCharlie. How do I start to make sense of it really quickly? You can use these types of lookups here to get some really easy detection capabilities, in addition to all the other rules we talked about earlier. But Sigma, for example, is not going to carry a static list of IP addresses associated with it. That would be something that you'd pull from a lookup. I want to note that lookups can be both public and private. So everything that you're seeing me scroll through here are public lookups. These are lookups that customers of ours or users of ours have posted and made publicly available. In some cases, they are actively maintained, like the JumpSec one that we just saw. In other cases, you've got these kind of more static ones. These are, IP addresses correlated to Chinese espionage campaigns as of January 2nd, 2019 and things. So this is an older lookup set for sure, usually pulled from a threat report or something along those lines. But it is still a really, really easy resource to just simply say, you know what? Again, 2019 is an older example, but let's just say hypothetically a brand new report came out. I think Mandy and at Google were just released APT 43, if I'm not mistaken. You could have a lookup for APT 43 and just simply turn that thing on and say, all right, here we go. I've got a lookup that allows me to not have to hard code all those hash values inside of a detection and response rule, but instead write a flexible detection and response rule. On that same note, if you're working for like an IR firm or you're a SOC analyst or something, and you've got multiple different customers that you need to use the same the same detection data sets against. Let's say, for example, I've got a list of ransomware IP addresses. All right, I'm just kind of shooting from the hip, but let's just say I've got a list of ransomware IP addresses that is unique to my knowledge, my institutional knowledge, and the investigations and the cases that I've done. I might not want to share that publicly with the world, but I might want to create a lookup, and you can certainly do that over here. You can create a private lookup that allows you to say my ransomware IPs, and I can go and I can add a description in. I can, again, a preview description, a full description. I can specify the different types of platforms that I want applicable, specify a website if I want to, and then I can go and actually configure the data that's inside of it if I want. And what that does is it lets me create a static data set for each of my organizations and then simply just apply the same detection and response rule in mass. It's a much cleaner way of porting detection and response rules from org to org rather than hard coding hashes or hard coding IP addresses or anything like that. And of course, it allows you for a little bit more flexibility in changing that data as well. Again, good documentation on that one, and also some really good resources on ways to kind of customize your experience and your detection and response capabilities with LimaCharlie. But when I talk about extending the platform, the thing I tend to focus on the most is the options available over in our services. Now, our services are essentially, for all intents and purposes, add-ons. And what these add-ons do is they utilize the endpoint sensor that's already deployed to perform some additional functionality. In some cases, full disclosure, this may involve pushing a binary, a single instantiated binary for very specific reasons. I'll talk about that in just a moment, to the system. But that LimaCharlie EDR visibility stays in place. You are not having to redeploy another binary. You're not having to work through a different set of tickets, of change controls and things like that. You're simply just using the LimaCharlie sensor to perform an additional functionality. In some cases, you don't actually have to need to push another binary. We can actually do that for you. Anything that you see on here with an LC logo are services that we've built out. Some of these allow you to extend the platform a little bit. So for example, there's infrastructure service. This will turn on a lot of the infrastructure as code functionalities for the organization. Some folks just aren't at that level. And other times it's something that gets turned on very, very quickly. And what it does is allows you to create templates and port common configurations across different organizations. There's a feature set such as Dumper. Dumper is the service that allows you to pull different artifacts back from a Windows host system. So if I think about the digital forensic and incident response applicability here, a lot of times pulling things back like a memory dump or an MFT or something like that is, a kind of critical and a table stakes or an always happens feature of any IR and things, because you're looking for some additional data. You're looking to pull back different data from systems to uncover adversary activity. And a lot of times in the past, that's involved either, visiting a place on site, walking around system to system. We don't really want to go that route. Instead, what I'd rather say is let's deploy LimaCharlie. Let's turn on this dumper service. And then I can script and tell the sensor to pull the MFT for me or to grab a memory dump for me. I can also make it part of a detection and response rule. So if a particular piece of malware gets found, for example, I can tell the platform, hey, if you find Cobalt Strike, if a Cobalt Strike alert trips, dump memory, dump MFT right then and there. And it allows me to automate a lot of those features and functionalities. So again, anything with an LC logo is going to be something that's created and published by us. We talked about outputs earlier in today's webcast. I will bring PagerDuty up as another type of output here, but also a service for us. This is someone could use this to trigger pages, obviously to trigger events, to create kind of a ticketing system, if you will. We do have a PagerDuty integration that allows me to just push that data right out to PagerDuty. Notice it is actually part of the action side of the detection and response rule, or the response side of the detection and response rule, if you will. And again, it's an easy way to just configure and set up a really simple, straightforward ticketing system without too much involvement. The other types of services I'll mention are things that allow me to do some additional things on the system. So it may just be extending the platform. It may be dumping different data sets, or maybe bringing in a third-party tool set. When I talk about detection and response rules with a lot of folks, Yara is one that I always bring up. But Yara is actually a service that we add on. It is included, meaning you can turn it on for free. You can use Yara rules for free, but the ability to Yara scan is actually not turned on by default until you enable it. In this case, when it's enabled, you'll actually be able to go back to your organization. And if I hop here, you'll be able to see the Yara scanner option show up once you've turned the Yara service on. So again, it's there, it's available, it's free to use, but you've got to actually turn it on inside of the add-on marketplace in order to make the use of it. This falls in the exact same category as what I was talking about earlier about portable code, portable detections, or perhaps utilizing detections across multiple organizations. I can configure a Yara scanner and point it to a common repository, maybe one that's owned by my team or owned by my SOC. And I can simply have those Yara rules apply across all my organizations instead of having to move them from one to the other. The other nice feature set that we've got here is one called Velociraptor. Now, Velociraptor is one that I've got to spend a little bit extra time on just because it is such a capable and powerful tool. Velociraptor is an advanced, as it says here, digital forensic and incident response tool that can be used to do additional data pulls on your endpoints or on your sensors that you might not be able to get as easily with a LimaCharlie sensor. And let me kind of quantify what that means. So Velociraptor is, as I mentioned, a free and open source tool. It is built with enterprise forensics in mind. Now, I will note Velociraptor, I've seen it used as a monitoring tool before. I think it is much more useful as a digital forensic and incident response tool. What I mean by that is I would rather see it used with LimaCharlie. I'd rather see it used as kind of that additional next step, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 type of support, meaning I need to pull additional artifacts off a system. I need to triage different parts. I need to run some compiled scripts. I need to do some additional functionality that Velociraptor already has built out. And again, with the service enabled, we'll head back over to our organization and we'll head down to our service request. And inside of service request is our Velociraptor. Now, let me make a quick note about this. Normally, when you deploy and use Velociraptor, you actually deploy the Velociraptor server. And that server is what you use to control your Velociraptor deployment. In this case, we do not prop up a server for you. We actually pull down the vanilla Velociraptor executable, use it, compile it, send it to the system with whatever command you need to run, and then pull all of that back. We do not leave a persistent Velociraptor instance on the system. But you can configure it here inside of the web app, which is really super useful. So I will say there's a really one feature set that a lot of folks are interested in if you're using Velociraptor. There is the show artifact type, which is a little bit more of gaining insight into what Velociraptor can do. Usually what folks are looking for is they're looking for the collection side. This is where I might say, hey, I'm interested in collecting certain types of data back. Maybe there's things that the sensor doesn't stream or I never configured to be streamed, which is totally okay. You may also want to come back and say, I don't necessarily want to pull back this data from an artifact perspective. I want to pull it back from the Velociraptor perspective, and I'll quantify why you might want to do that. One of the easiest examples I like to use is the Windows analysis evidence of execution. So this is actually Velociraptor terminology. And what the Windows analysis evidence of execution does is it is the option to go out to a Windows system. Velociraptor will pull from a few different sources of execution, such as prefetch being the one I'll pick on for this example, compile and parse all of that data for you. And what you get back is a really nice and clean, here's your parsed prefetch data. Now, I could go another route. I could go the route of configuring LimaCharlie to pull back my prefetch folder at certain intervals if I wanted to, or pull back all those files, bring those files down, parse them, compile them, analyze them, and put everything into a kind of a separate or a single sheet, if you will, or a single page for analysis or whatever it might be. Notice that Velociraptor just kind of eliminates a couple of those steps for you, and it does it much easier. Prefetch just being one example. If I kind of type in a bunch of different features here, notice there is a whole slew of Windows functions and capabilities of things that you might not want to have built in from a streaming perspective, but are things that you definitely want during an incident response or a forensic collection. Another one that I'll pick on, for example, is going to be our sys app compat shims. This is pulling the shim cache from the system, once again, to look for potential evidence of execution. The shim cache file itself, or the shim cache location, is in the Windows registry. I don't want to pull down the registry key and then have to run through a parsing script and everything myself. I'd much rather just tell Velociraptor, hey, here's what I'm interested in. Pull this thing down for me. The other nice part is that Velociraptor is also cross-platform, just like LimaCharlie is. So in addition to Windows, I also have Mac OS capabilities and I have Linux capabilities as well, which again allows me to just extend my platform capabilities out there. Hence the word extend. But the nice part about it is I don't have to go and configure, set up, run, and maintain my own Velociraptor instance. I can let LimaCharlie handle that one for me. You do also have the ability to import and create your own custom artifact if you wanted to. This is not something that I'll go into today. We might cover it in a later, like a 201 or a 301 session. But if you've got a custom artifact from Velociraptor you'd like to use, you can certainly bring that down. I will go ahead and select our evidence of execution that I had a little bit earlier. I'm going to select my Windows sensor. It just is really helping the platform along here to select a Windows sensor just to make it a little bit faster. Note that I could select by tags if I wanted to here, which would again allow me to not hit one system, but hit multiple if I wanted to based on tagging. And again, this is really, folks, where you can scale in speed and capability. Is let's just again say hypothetically I'm in some sort of an incident response or a really high value investigation and I need to pull evidence of execution from 20, 30, 50, 100, 1000 systems at one time. I don't want to go through the hassle of configuring any sort of infrastructure to do that. LimaCharlie lets me just handle it. And I can say, run this particular Velociraptor against all of these different systems and then just be done with it. Of course, we're not going to go that route this time. I'm just going to select a single sensor. I'm not going to drop any TTL or arguments inside of here, but again, just different ways to customize what's happening inside of Velociraptor. If I go ahead and I select to run this particular thing, I will get a message at the bottom that says the collect request has been received. I can head over to the dashboard to see what's going on. One thing I want to remind folks, when you kick off a Velociraptor collection, the output from that collection is actually going to be stored in the artifacts. You're going to see it show up for that particular system. Notice we don't have an artifact here just yet, which means Velociraptor is out there running. But look, it took 2 or 3 refreshes, and there we go. I've now got a Velociraptor file here. It is not indexed, so I can't view it inside of the LimaCharlie platform necessarily, but I can download the original or parsed data if I want. And what I've got now is that consolidated. I'm not going to bring it up because my screen's going to pause, but I've now got that consolidated, generated, parsed, nice little evidence of execution file that I can then analyze if I need to, push off to my analyst, push off to a team, perform some additional correlation against if need be. Whatever step there is in the analysis workflow, I've got all the capabilities there. Again, the nice thing about a feature set like this is I didn't have to go through the process of configuring and setting up a Velociraptor server, deploying its particular endpoint. I can just run that from right inside LimaCharlie. And if I find something that I want to look into further, guess what? I'm going to come back here and keep digging into it more. So again, it's a really useful way to go from simple endpoint monitoring all the way to I need to perform extensive incident response actions. And it is our add-ons and our services that allow you to scale this one endpoint sensor from 0 to hero really fast. The last service or the last extension or the last add-on I'll talk about is going to be our Atomic Red Team. This goes a little bit outside of the bounds of digital forensics and incident response, which is a good thing. I think this is one of the best use cases for I've already got a deployment. Why do I need to deploy again? Atomic Red Teams are a library of tests. They were developed by the folks over at Red Canary. Huge props to the team that originally designed this. They are a library of tests that map to MITRE's attack framework. And what they do is they're security control testing. They allow you to test things inside of your environment. They will simulate or kick off events of a certain type. And then you can go back to your detections window and see, did those things actually trip? Did the thing that I'm supposed to be detecting actually get detected in this case? And interestingly enough, there's some really good resources about this as well. But it's just a really easy way to say, I've written a detection for bits admin jobs. I want to make sure it actually works. So rather than me remoting into a system and kicking off bits admin jobs, I might just use Atomic Red Team and just push this thing out. Again, with the service enabled, I'll hop back to my organization and we'll see that it's going to be under service request once again. There's our Atomic Red Team. And look how nice and clean this particular setup is. All of the different types of techniques or tactics and techniques are laid out, and I can select one by one what types of things I'd like to run. We break them out by high level tactic, and then we get into techniques and even sub techniques if need be. So for example, here's my T1056. This is input capture, and I can go down to key logging, GUI input capture, credential API hooking, so on and so forth. Notice I get all the way from initial access, exfiltration, impact, privilege escalation, execution, so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of different options here. But what I love the most about the Atomic Red Team is, once again, it allows me to say, I wrote a detection for a thing. Let me see if that thing actually works. We talked about replaying rules in our last session, but this is a nice way to have to not replay rules, but instead fire a little detection out on a system and see if that thing actually works, see if it actually detects what we're looking for. I'm going to choose the bits jobs just because I was talking about it a little bit earlier. Notice that bits jobs falls under two high-level tactics. The first one being defense evasion, the second one being persistence. So there's a couple of different ways or a couple of different things that bit jobs apply to. Notice I need to select it just once. At the top, I selected my Windows demo server as something to run against. I'm only going to run this one particular job, and that's it. I'm going to hit run tests, and it's off in the background now doing its thing. And my next step might be to head over to detections to see if it got fired. But let's say you are going another route. Let's say you just came across a threat report, and that threat report called out a few different MITRE tactics or techniques that an adversary is using. So rather than me comparing against my own detection, I might want to say, what types of coverage do I already have against techniques being used out there in the wild? Guess what? Same workflow applies. I'm going to go and say, let's just say hypothetically, this bad actor who was out there was utilizing scheduled tasks, PowerShell, and Python. So we've got, three different techniques and sub techniques here being used. And I'm going to want to see what types of coverage do I already have in place. The thing about being able to answer this question, folks, is this is a great way to figure out and analyze with your blue and red team where you already have coverage or where you may not have coverage. That's also a very common executive or senior management question. Hey, I read a thing. Are we protected against that thing? I don't know. Let me go to Atomic Red Team and see exactly what that looks like. So I might select a few different tests. I might go ahead and run those and then bump over to my detection window to see what actually got detected, what's there, what's not there. And again, it's a really easy way to extend the platform and say, I've already got an endpoint agent that's out there. I've already got that LimaCharlie sensor deployed out on my various endpoints. If I am looking to test security controls, why not utilize the deployment that I've already got? Why not utilize the visibility that I've already got? And that's exactly what our add-ons and what our extensions and our different features are built to do. So, in summary for everyone today, we covered a couple of different things. The first was our outputs. Remember, this is where you are saying, I need to get data out of LimaCharlie to a different source for a multitude of reasons. It might be a ticketing application. It might be a case management solution. It might be email alerts. It might be detection priority, whatever it is. Regardless, we have you covered. We've got lots of different streams and then lots of different output options as well. The other thing we looked at today were our add-ons. This is where we can really extend the platform out. We talked about a few different types of add-ons, the first being APIs, lookups, and rule sets. These are ways to enrich your data or standardize or import detection rules or import known bad things that you might want to write detection rules against. And then we also looked at services. Services are that feature that extend platform capabilities, either with kind of native LimaCharlie tools that you might want to add on or bolt on, or via third-party tools that you might want to enable and then subsequently use for some additional features like, again, digital forensic collection, security control testing, ticketing systems, whatever it might be. Regardless, if you are browsing your way through the marketplace or through our add-ons today or in the future, and you find yourself looking for something that's just simply not there, you know my answer. Hit us up in the community Slack and let us know. We'd love to get all the feedback that we can. All right. Well, with that said, everyone, that concludes today's LC101 session. A huge thank you for joining me. I really appreciate having you all here. It's been great to walk through these series. Keep an eye on the Slack channel and some of our other social media outlets for our next 101 or 201 series where we dive into different parts of the LimaCharlie platform. And as always, if you've got some ideas, things you'd like to see, questions, comments, concerns, hit us up in Slack, hit us up on email, hit us up on LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you can find us. Last but not least, we are very, very close to RSA season. RSA is next week. For anyone who's going to be there, please come by and find the LimaCharlie team. We'll be down in the South Hall. We'll be looking forward to seeing you there. We will be at ThoughtCon in May. We will be at FirstCon in Montreal in June, and we will be at Black Hat in Vegas. Hope to see you out at as many events as we can. With that said, I'm Matt, signing off. I'll see y'all on our next video. Take care.